There's something comforting about the small routines of modern life. Maybe you had a shower earlier, hot water pouring over your backsteam, softening the air. Maybe you reached for a clean towel, a soft robe, or opened a cabinet lined with familiar bottles promising lavender honey or something vaguely oceanic. That comfort, that calm rhythm of cleanliness, it's become so ordinary, we barely notice it. And yet it wasn't always this way. Tonight, we're stepping quietly away from all that, into a world where nothing is simple and nothing is soft. This isn't the kind of hygiene you brag about in a spa brochure. No, this is Victorian women's hygiene in all its layered, powdered, perfumed complexity. A world of cracked basins and frozen fingers of chamber pots tucked under lace and secrets soaked into linen. But don't worry, we're going to take it slow and sleepy and with a little bit of dry humor, because some of what you're about to endure is, well, absolutely ridiculous. If you happen to enjoy these kinds of strange little historical detours, feel free to like or subscribe, but only if you feel like it. I always enjoy hearing where my listeners are tuning in from. So if you're curled up somewhere quiet, maybe under a snowy roof in Oslo, or listening with one ear while drifting off in Brisbane, drop a comment when you're awake again. I do read them, and they always make me smile. Now, if you're listening while tucked under a clean duvet with crisp sheets, try not to feel too smug. Because by the time we're done, even your worst morning will feel like a dream compared to this one. So close your eyes, or keep them open just barely. Let's begin. You wake to the gray hush of a London morning, the kind that doesn't so much shine as it seeps in around the curtains. The room is small, perhaps 10 by 12 feet, with ceilings too low to feel grand, but just high enough to trap the cold. The air is damp, the kind of damp that lives in the bones of the building. You can smell it in the walls. There's always some patch of green creeping along the corners, no matter how often it's scrubbed. Though truthfully, no one scrubs it that often. You pull yourself upright from a mattress that's a little too thin, a little too lumpy, laid over iron slats that creak every time you shift. There's no heat. The fireplace went cold in the night, and the coals are more ash than embers. If you're lucky, very lucky, you might have a servant to bring hot water in a tin pail. But that's only if you're wealthy enough. For most women, including you, what you have is a washstand with a pitcher and bowl. The pitcher is filled with water drawn from the yard tap the night before, and that water is now icily still colder than the air. You steel yourself, unwrap your arms from the shawl or blanket you'd clutched in sleep, and pour a little into the basin. It hits the ceramic with a sharp splash. The first touch of it on your face feels like needles. There's no gentle foam, no lather, because soap, if you have any at all, is a lye-heavy, crumbly block that strips more oil than dirt. So instead, you dip a cloth into the cold water and begin what's generously called a wash. A bit over the eyes, a pat down the neck. If you're feeling ambitious, perhaps under the arms. No one really expects more. In this world, the idea of a full bath is a luxury, a rare one. Baths require effort, fire to heat water, a tub which must be filled by hand. And afterwards, that same water must be emptied also by hand. For most women, bathing isn't a daily thing, or even weekly. It's event-based, ceremonial. Perhaps before a ball, a wedding, or a seasonal change of clothing. Historians still argue whether the Victorian ideal of cleanliness was more moral than medical. Certainly, they wrote endlessly about purity, but that purity seemed to apply more to what you thought and wore than to how often you cleaned your ears. Hygiene was a performance, visible, but rarely literal. And so in this quiet moment at the basin, you become part of the great Victorian illusion. The stiff collar, the polished boots, the fine embroidery, all of it carefully concealing the fact that your body underneath hasn't been fully washed in days, or weeks, or longer. You lean forward, splash a bit more water on your face, and catch your reflection in the blurry mirror. There are no toothbrushes yet, not in the modern sense. Perhaps you'll chew a bit of chalk or dab some baking soda on a rag and scrub at your teeth if you have time. But there's no mint, no foam, no mouthwash. The taste is bitter metallic, vaguely dusty, which is frankly how everything tastes here. Your fingers are already stiff with cold, and you haven't even removed your nightclothes yet. The layers beneath are heavy flannel, if you're lucky, or coarse cotton if you're not. And beneath those, there's the real challenge: how to dress for a day in a body that society says should be clean, modest, and pristine, but gives you nothing practical to make that happen. There's an odd irony here. Victorian society obsessed over appearances. Etiquette manuals dictated how to enter a room, how to shake hands, how to faint decorously if your corset became too tight. But no one ever wrote a best-selling guide to washing your underarms. Still, the expectations are real. You're to be fresh-faced, calm, composed, smelling faintly of lavender, not livestock, radiant yet invisible. And so you continue. Dab and pat. Fold the cloth neatly. Pour the water out the window, careful not to hit the street or a passing pedestrian. And then you brace yourself for the next challenge underwear, or more accurately, the strange absence of it. But that's for a moment from now. For now, the water in the basin has gone still again. Your hands are red and raw from cold, but your eyes are open, and your day has begun. Let's keep going. The first challenge of the day, if you don't count the water, comes just as you reach for your underthings. Or rather, what passes for them. Victorian modesty, for all its lace and moralism, had a curious blind spot when it came to underwear. You pull a cotton garment from the chair where you laid it out the night before. It looks like a pair of knee-length shorts gathered at the waist with a bit of ribbon or a single button and just loose enough to layer under multiple petticoats. So far, so normal. Until you realize the middle is missing. Not torn, not forgotten, intentionally absent. These are split drawers, open crotch underwear designed that way on purpose. There's no seam down the center. Just two overlapping panels that provide modesty in front and back, but nothing in between. At first glance, it might seem scandalous. At second glance, deeply inconvenient. But in practice, they're exactly what society, and more importantly, plumbing required. You pull them on by the waist and try not to think too much about it. The idea behind split drawers wasn't about comfort or liberation. It was practical in its own very Victorian way. Imagine what it meant to use a chamber pot while wearing 5 layers of skirts, a corset, a chemise, and a bustle. Every visit to the privy was a logistical operation. Removing your undergarments entirely just to relieve yourself would be absurd. So instead, the garments were designed to let you go without removing anything. Just crouch, adjust your balance, and do your best. The layers would fall back into place afterward, concealing everything. Technically, mainstream historical sources, from fashion archives to museum collections, confirm that split drawers were the most common form of women's underwear from the early to mid-19th century, particularly in Britain. By the 1880s, they began to fade from fashion, among middle and upper-class women slowly replaced by closed drawers or combinations, especially as indoor plumbing improved and practicality shifted. But during much of the Victorian era, especially the earlier decades, open drawers were simply standard. The idea of panties in the modern sense wouldn't catch on until much later. You move through the rest of your dressing routine. Over the drawers, you slip on your chemise, long, plain, and usually made from linen or cotton. Its main job is to protect your corset from sweat and oil, and vice versa. Then come the corset and the stays tight enough to support, structured enough to shape. Lacing it takes effort and usually help. But for women without a maid or sister nearby, the front lace styles were a blessing, even if not as dramatic in silhouette. One by one, the layers pile on. Petticoat, crinoline, bodice, skirt. Each layer adds volume and weight, a kind of armor against the world, or at least against the chill in a poorly insulated house. Each movement becomes more restricted. Sitting must be considered. Bending over must be strategized. There is nothing spontaneous about Victorian dress. But there's a rhythm to it, and rhythm brings a kind of calm. Historians have long debated whether Victorian women were victims of fashion or participants in it. Certainly, the tight-laced caricature of the helpless damsel has been exaggerated in modern retellings. Many women wore looser stays. Many could dress themselves, and many moved comfortably within these garments, once accustomed to them. But the truth remains, dressing fully each morning took time, energy, and no small amount of maneuvering. And beneath it all, the secret open-hearted garment that no one ever saw was the split drawer. It's strange. You think how Victorian society managed to be obsessed with modesty and yet entirely unbothered by the idea that women's undergarments were wide open. But then again, privacy meant something different. You weren't expected to be physically sealed off at all times. You were expected to be socially invisible, quiet, composed, uncomplaining. Whether or not your clothing had a flap in the middle didn't really enter into it. As you tighten the last ribbon and adjust the fall of your skirts, you catch a glimpse of yourself in the mirror again. What you see is neat, proper, presentable, and no one would ever guess that just under the surface there's a functional gap in your foundation garments. That's the point, of course. You move carefully across the room. You can't bend too far, not with the corset in place, and the skirts swing like a bell with every step. You'll need to walk with a kind of floating posture for the rest of the day, chin up, shoulders back, no sudden movements. But for now, you feel settled, structured, contained. Your body is no cleaner than it was an hour ago. But your clothing is doing the talking now. And in this era, that's what matters. As you move toward the door, your skirts brushing the floor, you pass the chamber pot tucked discreetly under the washstand. Still clean, still waiting. You make a note of it, not urgently, just mentally. Because when the time comes, it'll be a whole production. But that's for later. For now, your drawers are in place. Open where they need to be covered, where they matter. And the day can finally begin in earnest. You're standing in front of a modest mirror, well, more like a piece of looking glass, with just enough clarity to reflect your face when the light hits it right, and your hair is in that in-between state. Not quite clean, not quite unmanageable, just a little limp, a little greasy, a little familiar. You know what's coming, and the thought of it makes your shoulders sag. Because today is wash day, not for your clothes. No, that's far too much trouble for a Tuesday, but for your hair. And that is no small undertaking. Victorian hair washing isn't a routine. It's an ordeal. There is no shampoo bottle waiting for you, no herbal scented promise of silkiness and shine. The closest thing you have is a raw egg or two, maybe 3 if your hair is thick. You take the first one from the chipped bowl on the washstand, careful not to crack it too hard. This is precious stuff, not because it's expensive necessarily, but because everything is effort. You crack it. Let the yolk and white slide into your hand, and then gently smear it into your scalp. It's cold, wet, slippery. The sensation is vaguely unsettling, especially as it starts to drip. You rub it in anyway, fingers working the egg into the roots like you're marinating a Sunday roast. Because, in a sense, you are. You see, Victorian women prized long hair. The longer the better. It was seen as a symbol of health, fertility, and virtue. Mainstream historical records from etiquette manuals to women's magazines of the 19th century highlight that women often brushed their hair up to 100 strokes per night. It wasn't just vanity. It was essential maintenance. But despite the obsession with appearance, actual washing was infrequent. Once a week was ambitious. Once every 2 weeks was more realistic. Some women went even longer, depending on social status and personal circumstances. The egg works as a sort of emulsifier. It binds to the oils in your hair and lifts them away when rinsed. Or, at least, that's the idea. The first egg is followed by a second, maybe beaten with a little lemon juice if you're fancy, or vinegar if you're practical. Your scalp tingles not in a refreshing way, but in a slightly raw, acidic way. Still, it's better than some alternatives. Quirky detail. Some women in rural areas reportedly used beer to wash their hair, not to drink, though that happened too, but as a conditioning rinse. It gave body volume and a vaguely sour smell that was apparently the price of beauty. Others used herbal infusions, rosemary, nettle, chamomile, boiled into murky stews, poured over the head with the hope that nature would do what soap could not. And then comes the rinsing. There is no faucet. You pour pitcher after pitcher of cold water over your head, each splash shocking, each drop racing down the back of your neck. You lean forward over the basin, or perhaps a tin tub on the floor, and pray that the water doesn't run down your collar. The floor gets wet. Your sleeves get wet. Everything gets wet, except the one towel you have, which is already damp from drying your face earlier. And you're not done. Now comes styling. You pick up the tin of pomade, pry the lid off with a small clink, and scoop out a thumbful. It's soft, but heavy goose fat mixed with beeswax. Or, if you're truly up to date, with the late 19th century petroleum jelly. Vaseline was patented in the 1870s and became a household product soon after. The texture is cloying, sticky, and vaguely rancid if it's been sitting in the heat too long. You rub it between your palms, then rake your hands through your still damp hair, pulling the strands into place. It gives the hair weight structure sheen. It also traps every speck of dust in the air, every stray bit of ash or soot from the coal fire, and ensures that your pillow will stick to your scalp, like parchment when you go to bed tonight. But it holds the hair. That's the point. You twist your locks into a simple bun, secure them with a few pins, and add a comb if you're feeling elegant. If it's a special occasion, maybe you'll sprinkle in some scented oil rose if you can afford it, lavender if you're middle class, or just a dab of cologne from a shared bottle in the household if you're not picky. You take a step back and look in the mirror again. It's not glamorous, but it's done. And that's what counts. Historians still argue whether these elaborate routines were a burden or a point of pride. On one hand, it's easy to see them as exhausting layers of effort with little practical result. On the other hand, women controlled this space. Hair care was one of the few domains where they set the rules, passed down knowledge, and created beauty by their own standards. There was no man standing behind you with scissors. No barbershop full of judgment. Just you, your eggs, your oil, and the long road to presentability. And you needed to look presentable, because no matter how tired you were, how sore your arms had become from scrubbing and combing and twisting, the world expected you to look like you weren't trying. Like beauty just happened to you. Effortless, effacing, eternal. A knock at the door breaks your thoughts, someone reminding you of a chore, a visitor, or the fact that breakfast is waiting. You wipe your hands, pat your hair one last time, and smooth your skirts. The faint scent of egg lingers hidden under the weight of rose pomade. As you leave the room, you notice something odd near the edge of the skirting board, a small hole barely wider than a coin, and a few tiny scratch marks around it. Mice. They love the smell of goose fat. You make a mental note to check your brush later. It wouldn't be the first time you found chewed bristles or a missing pin. But for now, there's nothing to be done. You step out of the room with hair that is heavy, glossy, and socially acceptable. And that really is the best you can do. It begins as a dull ache, deep, low familiar. You know what it means before you even move. There's no calendar on your wall, no discrete app on a phone, just the worn rhythm of your own body whispering what's coming. You lie there for a moment, in the quiet heaviness of morning, clutching your belly beneath the covers. It won't wait. It never does. And so, despite the stiffness in your joints and the chill clinging to your skin, you rise. Menstruation in the Victorian era is not just private, it's practically forbidden. You're not to speak of it, not directly. Euphemisms abound. Your time, the courses, a monthly visitor, words spoken in whispers in hallways, or not at all. And yet, even in this hushed world, you still have to manage it. Your undergarments do nothing to help. The split drawers, the very same that offered convenient access for chamber pots, also ensure that there is absolutely no protective barrier down there. So you reach for what every woman keeps tucked away: cloth rags. Strips of linen folded and layered, sometimes quilted, if you're fortunate enough to have a bit of batting. If not, just plain cotton squares that have been washed and dried so many times, they feel like soft paper. There are no adhesives, no wings, no elastic. The rag is held in place by tension, by your thighs, or by safety pins, if you're lucky or unlucky, depending on how you feel about pinning sharp objects near soft flesh. It slips, it shifts. You walk carefully. Every step is a negotiation with gravity. And still, you're one of the fortunate ones. Because you have cloth. Poorer women, particularly those working in factories or as domestic servants, often had nothing at all. Some used layers of old newspaper. Others repurposed bits of flannel or even dried moss. In the worst cases, women simply bled into their clothes and washed them as best they could afterward, if they could. Historically, many women hand-washed their rags in cold water, often late at night or in early morning hours, to avoid detection. You do the same. You reach under the bed, retrieve a small basin, and pour in just enough water from the pitcher. No soap too precious. Just scrubbing with your fingers, wringing out the blood-stained cloth, and watching the water bloom crimson, then pink, then cloudy, and gray. Once clean, you need to dry them. But not outside. Never outside. You don't want the neighbors to see. Even in a world where people dump their chamber pots into the street, hanging menstrual rags in public is considered obscene. So, you find a quiet spot. Behind the armoire, tucked over the back of a chair, shielded by a shawl. Some women hang them behind framed paintings. Some beneath the bed. Some more daringly pin them inside their wardrobe doors to dry in the musty dark. This too is an ordeal. You try not to think too hard about the bacteria, about the smell, about the fact that nothing is ever fully dry in this room. But what choice do you have? Disposable sanitary products don't exist. The first commercial sanitary napkin wouldn't appear until the 1890s, and even then only for the very rich. Tampons, not until the 20th century. The menstrual cup, a rumor from the future. Quirky detail. In some parts of rural England and Ireland, there were whispered beliefs that menstrual blood could kill crops, curdle milk, or sour butter. Whether you believed it or not, the fact that others did meant one thing: discretion wasn't just a social courtesy. It was protection. And so, you keep quiet. Historians still argue whether the silence around menstruation was rooted more in morality or medical ignorance. Some claim it was modesty taken to an extreme. Others argue it was fear, an extension of ancient taboos about female impurity. Whatever the case, the result was, the same women endured alone and unspoken, managing their bodies with no help, little comfort, and even less conversation. You move through your day as best you can. There are chores to be done, errands to run, obligations to meet. You tuck your rags into a cloth pouch and carry an extra in your pocket just in case. You're careful when you sit. You stand slowly. You avoid laughter, sneezes, and steep steps. You feel every shift, every warm pulse. And then there are the cramps. You reach for a warm brick wrapped in flannel, left near the fireplace overnight. It's lukewarm now, but better than nothing. Some women drink raspberry leaf tea or chew cloves. Others use laudanum, a tincture of opium mixed with alcohol. It numbs the pain. And everything else. But it's addictive, and you've heard stories of women wasting away from its grip, so you avoid it, unless the pain is unbearable. You lie down for a while, in the middle of the afternoon, pressing the warm brick to your belly and breathing slowly. The world spins a little. Your corset digs into your sides. And you think, not for the first time, how ironic it is that society demands you be graceful, lovely, and sweet, even when your insides are twisting themselves into knots. Later that evening, when you finally remove your clothes, you find blood on your chemise. A small spot, but enough. You sigh. Another piece to wash to hide, to explain if someone asks. You scrub it in the basin by candlelight, hoping it will fade before morning. Maybe it will. There's no one to ask for help. No one you dare ask. Your mother might have told you something when you were younger, or maybe not. Many girls first bled without warning and thought they were dying. Some ran to confess their sins, certain they'd been punished. You were lucky. Someone told you. But not much. No one talks about how it changes your mood, your hunger, your sleep. No one talks about how the pain moves from belly to back, to thighs and back again. You're expected to carry on. So you do. Before bed, you check the cloths drying behind the dresser. Still damp. You hang another beside them, careful not to let them touch. A moth flutters past the candle. Somewhere in the walls, a pipe groans. And you lie down on the bed knees, drawn up, eyes fluttering closed, not because you're at peace, but because there's nothing else to do. In the distance outside, a carriage rattles by on the cobbled street. You hear the creak of wheels, the soft clop of hooves, the murmurs of someone drunk and singing off-key. Life goes on. You curl beneath the covers, cloth folded neatly between your legs, and wonder how many other women in how many other houses are lying just like this, silent aching, waiting for the red to pass. You don't want to move. Your body is still heavy with sleep, and that low, dull cramp hasn't quite let go of your spine. But when nature calls you, answer, even if the answer isn't simple. There is no flush, no tidy bathroom waiting with bright tiles and scented soap. There is only the chamber pot tucked discreetly under the bed, like a secret you pretend not to notice. It's ceramic, heavy cold to the touch. You pull it out quietly, careful not to rattle it against the floorboards. Victorian modesty might demand that no one speak of such things, but it certainly doesn't mean you get to skip them. Morning begins with discomfort, both physical and social. Using a chamber pot is neither elegant nor private. The walls are thin. The room is small. If you share the space with a sister, a cousin, or even a servant, well, everyone just learns to pretend they don't hear anything. If you're of the wealthier sort, you might have a fancier solution. A pot built into a wooden chair or hidden beneath a hinged table. There were even specially designed toilet tables for ladies disguised as part of the bedroom furniture. But no matter how clever the hiding place, what happens next is always the same. Someone has to empty it. Perhaps that someone is you. Perhaps it's a servant. If you're lucky, there's a shared privy in the backyard, little more than a wooden seat over a pit. But on cold or rainy mornings, or if you're just too tired, the window becomes an appealing option. It's not polite, but it's common. A quick toss into the street, followed by a muttered garde as low, an old French warning, meaning watch out for the water. That's if you warn people. Many don't. Mainstream historical fact. In Victorian cities, it was common to dispose of waste directly into the streets. The sewage would eventually flow into open gutters down to the Thames if you lived in London. It created an unrelenting stench that permeated neighborhoods, soaked into clothing and stuck in your hair. Summer was worst. The heat made everything rise, but even indoors, the smell never fully left. The chamber pot was only emptied once a day, if that. If you had multiple people in the household, siblings, aging parents, visiting cousins, there might be more than one pot, or just one used repeatedly. Some households kept a jug of vinegar or lavender water nearby to splash in after use. A noble effort, but ultimately futile. You rise from the bed and maneuver awkwardly over the pot. There's no toilet paper, of course. That won't be a regular household item for decades yet. You might use bits of cloth if you can afford to wash them, If not, there are alternatives: scraps of newspaper, torn catalog pages, even dried corn cobs in rural areas. In London, old newsprint was the common choice. It left ink stains, but better that than nothing. When you're finished, you wipe carefully, pour a little water from the pitcher to rinse your hands, and slide the pot back beneath the bed like a dog curling up in its corner. You don't speak of it again. That's the Victorian way. Now you need to make your way to the back garden or down the stairwell depending on the home layout. Most privies are shared, a row of outhouses in the alley, or a shared lavatory down the hall in a tenement. They're rarely cleaned and never well lit. Flies are a permanent feature, rats an occasional one, and for women the experience is more awkward. Those corsets and layers of skirts aren't exactly designed for speed or convenience. You don't just squat and go. First, you have to lift bunch arrange balance, and heaven help you if the hem of your petticoat slips and brushes the ground. Laundry, as we'll see, is no small task. Quirky detail. Some Victorian ladies' gowns had hidden flaps or were deliberately made in two pieces to make toileting slightly easier, though not exactly dignified. There's even record of chamber pots made with noise-dampening lids for use during social calls. Yes, there were visiting chamber pots for when a lady simply couldn't hold it through an afternoon of polite conversation. You'd excuse yourself, head to the drawing room, and hope no one heard a thing. Historians still argue whether this daily indignity was more about lack of infrastructure or societal priorities. Certainly, by the mid-19th century, engineers had already begun designing proper indoor plumbing systems. And yet, implementation lagged far behind. The idea of women relieving themselves with any sense of comfort was not exactly high on the public works agenda. So, your morning continues. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders and peer out the window. A man in a long apron is pushing a wooden cart down the alley. He's a night soil man, one of the most dreaded jobs in Victorian Britain. His task is to empty the privies, scoop out the cesspools, and haul away the buckets of human waste. But he only works at night when no one sees him. Because even looking at him, let alone speaking to him, is considered bad luck. If you're lucky, he came last week. If not, the smell from the yard might be strong enough to turn your stomach. Some households try to cover it with ash or quicklime. Others toss in old herbs or even coffee grounds. But nothing truly helps. Still, you continue. Because what choice do you have? Back inside, you sprinkle a bit of rosewater on a handkerchief and tuck it into your sleeve. It helps slightly, enough to make it through the breakfast table without losing your appetite. You've got work to do, errands to run, letters to write. And somewhere behind the polite nods and the careful curtsies is the knowledge that everyone else you meet, every perfectly composed woman in every bonnet and glove, is going through the exact same thing. And all of them are pretending it isn't happening. You sit down at the small wooden vanity, its surface uneven and scarred with age, the pale finish worn away in patches by generations of women who have sat here before you. Women who knew, as you do now, that beauty is not born, it is assembled. The air is cold against your neck. The fire long since gone out, and the small mirror, just a hand-sized oval of cloudy glass, offers only the faintest reflection. But it's enough. You reach for the first part of your morning routine. 2 slices of raw beef, thin and pinkish gray, wrapped in a scrap of muslin the night before. They're cold to the touch, now slick with condensation, and smell faintly of iron and milk. You unfold them and press one to each cheek. The theory passed around in hushed conversation at teas and whispered through drawing rooms is that the beef helps keep your skin taut, your cheeks smooth, your face youthful. You don't question it. Not because it works exactly, but because it's what women like you do. One day, someone saw the way fresh meat held its shape, the way it stayed cool and pink, and thought perhaps foolishly that the same could be true for a woman's face. The belief stuck, as beliefs often do. And now, here you are, sitting in a freezing room, dabbing butcher's cuts across your skin, while the city outside groans to life under a sky the color of old flour. You peel the meat away and discard it in the waste bucket under the table, wiping your cheeks with a linen cloth that smells faintly of lavender and damp. Next comes the powder pressed into a small tin, its contents a dull ivory shade flecked with something darker. You dab a puff into it, tap off the excess, and gently dust your face. The powder clings to your skin, drying it instantly, masking imperfections, but tightening uncomfortably. It's chalky clinging, and it's made of lead. Mainstream historical fact, by the mid-19th century, many women, especially in Britain and France, used lead-based face powders to achieve a pale, uniform complexion. The dangers were known, but largely ignored, as the appearance of flawless skin was a social currency more valuable than health. Long-term use of these powders led to symptoms including facial paralysis, skin corrosion, miscarriage, and even death. Still, their popularity endured, especially among upper-class women who could afford high-quality imports and believed that white skin signaled refinement, delicacy, and class. You tell yourself, it's just a little. Not enough to matter. Just enough to cover the unevenness that sleep or age or sorrow leaves behind. Then, you reach for the rouge, a small pot of paste colored with cochineal beetle extract, or sometimes vermilion mercury sulfide, another substance everyone pretends isn't dangerous. You apply a dab to the apples of your cheeks, blending with fingers that are still cold, and slightly raw from the morning wash. The effect is subtle too much, and you'll look common. Too little, and you'll look ill. It's a line you walk daily, one dab at a time. Then, the lips. The richer the household, the more likely you are to have a tin of waxy colorant, often a mixture of tallow plant oils and more heavy metals. You press it gently over your lips, trying not to inhale the faint scent of metal and old flowers. The result is not glossy, but soft a stain that suggests health without suggesting vanity. Looking too well groomed would be vulgar. The goal is to look effortless, though the effort takes nearly an hour. You lean forward again toward the dim mirror and reach for the small coal stick. Ground from antimony or lead sulfide and mixed with oils, it smudges easily, darkening the edges of your eyes, giving them a defined sunken appearance that passes for both alluring and respectable. The ancient Egyptians did it first, of course, and the fashion never quite died. But no one speaks of the eye infections, or the way the coal creeps into the tear ducts, accumulating in places unseen. Quirky detail, some women, in an effort to achieve that wide-eyed, glassy look popular in fashion plates, use belladonna drops to dilate their pupils. Extracted from the deadly nightshade plant, these drops temporarily paralyze the iris muscles, enlarging the eyes, but causing blurred vision, dry mouth, and in larger doses, hallucinations. The name belladonna itself, Italian for beautiful woman, says everything about how far someone might go for a momentary glimmer of allure. There is a strange tension to this part of your day. You sit perfectly still, creating a version of yourself meant to suggest purity, delicacy, and softness, all while covering your face in poison. And yet for many women, this wasn't viewed as vanity. It was duty. You were expected to be appealing, radiant, but not obviously so. Painted but modest, seen but never loud. The more subtle your efforts, the more admired your results. Historians still argue whether Victorian cosmetics were a form of societal submission or a quiet rebellion. On one hand, women risked their health to meet male-driven beauty standards. On the other, they crafted a public image, wielding appearance, as a kind of influence in a world where formal power was denied to them. Some see rouge and powder as chains. Others see them as armor. You set down the puff and rise, walking to the corner, where a jar of pomade waits. It smells of lard and violets. You warm a bit between your fingers and begin smoothing it over your hair, arranging it into something structured and respectable. If you're lucky, the pomade is made with bear fat imported from Russia. If not, it's just rendered pork or goose. Either way, it's dense, greasy, and absolutely beloved by vermin. Mice in particular find it delicious. Some women sleep in hair cages, little metal domes fitted over their heads to keep rats from chewing at their pomaded curls in the night. You pin in place a few curls, made not of your own hair, but bought possibly from a servant girl or the hairbrush of a stranger. The human hair trade is brisk these days. Entire bundles sold at auction, braided and dyed to suit every complexion. You think you see a strand that's too golden to match, and you tug it out with a small sigh. And yet, as you step back from the mirror, adjusting your collar, you look by every standard that matters perfect. Pale, composed, fragrant. You carry no visible traces of fatigue, fear, or frustration. Your face is still. And that is what matters. You are ready to receive guests, to attend luncheon, to take tea, to pretend. The irony never quite leaves you. You wear death on your face each day to appear more alive. You poison yourself to be seen as healthy. But you smile just faintly and walk to the door. Because you know the rules. You've learned the game. And for now, you're still able to play. There's a certain luxury to smelling like nothing at all. These days, you can shower daily, maybe even twice if you like warm water. Fluffy towels, a shelf lined with soaps that promise cucumber, mint, ocean breeze, or some ambiguous morning dew. You can walk into a room and smell of nothing but laundry and light citrus. But for you here, in this heavy Victorian morning, there is no such thing as neutral. Everything has a scent, and most of those scents are less than pleasant. You haven't bathed in over a week. That's not unusual. It's not even frowned upon. Full body bathing in this time and place is reserved for the wealthy, the idle, or the very, very ill. Soap is expensive, heating water is a chore, and tubs are a nightmare to fill and empty. And besides, too much bathing is still considered a bit suspicious, either indulgent or immoral, depending on who's judging. So you skip it. You have to. But that doesn't mean you're content to walk around smelling like chamber pots and boiled cabbage. You reach instead for the small glass bottle on your dresser shaped like a teardrop and topped with a glass stopper. Inside is your best defense perfume. Scented oils, alcohol, tinctures, botanical extracts, layered into complex fragrances that range from floral to musky to oddly medicinal. You remove the stopper, dab a little onto your wrist, then your neck, then the hem of your sleeve. You add a drop to the ribbon in your hair, to your gloves, even to your shoes. You don't want to smell clean. You want to smell fragrant. Mainstream historical fact. In Victorian England, people believed that foul smells, miasmas, were the cause of disease. Before germ theory took hold, bad odors were blamed for everything from cholera to typhus. As a result, masking smells with perfume wasn't just a social courtesy, it was considered an act of protection. Wealthy homes were saturated with floral waters, herb sachets, and incense. Some even lined their curtains and handkerchiefs with scented wax, believing the aroma would filter the air. You inhale, and the perfume catches at the back of your throat, sharp, a little sour. It's not a light spray like you might imagine from modern atomizers. No, this is dense stuff, unrefined by today's standards. The scent is both overwhelming and necessary. You layer it until you stop noticing the smell of your body beneath, or anyone else's, because the truth is, the world around you smells intense. Streets soaked with horse manure, tanneries belching out smoke and acid, fishmongers dumping their waste into gutters, a neighbor's chamber pot emptied out the window just this morning. And beneath it all, the tang of coal smoke that clings to every surface like a bitter shadow. So yes, you wear perfume. A lot of it. Not just to cover yourself, but to create a kind of scented barrier between you and the rest of the world. If you can smell lilies and bergamot, maybe you can pretend you're not also smelling rot and sweat and the unmistakable sourness of unwashed humanity. Quirky detail. Some perfumes were more than just floral masks. They had unusual ingredients that reflected the era's strange blend of superstition and chemistry. One popular Victorian fragrance, Millefleur, sometimes included ingredients like ambergris, a waxy substance from whale intestines, musk extracted from glands of deer, and even civet oil from the anal glands of a small cat-like animal. These were prized for their staying power. The more pungent, the more effective. You dab a little of your evening blend behind your ears, despite the fact that it's not evening. You're not going to the opera or hosting a salon, but it makes you feel elegant, composed, like someone who is not walking around in a corset that hasn't been aired out in days. You shift your weight, adjusting the tight stays under your gown, and wonder how long you can make the illusion last today. Perfume in this time is gendered, classed, and judged. A delicate lavender water might be considered respectable for a young woman, while heavier, muskier blends might whisper of improper appetites. Too much scent, and you're trying too hard. Too little, and people will assume worse. There are books, pamphlets, articles, all devoted to the correct use of fragrance. Entire personalities are defined by what you smell like. Historians still argue whether Victorian perfume culture was driven more by social pressure or actual olfactory need. Certainly, the upper classes were obsessed with etiquette, and part of that etiquette included the subtle art of not offending other noses. But the line between necessity and vanity was often blurred. Was perfume a luxury, a disguise, a health precaution? Likely all three, and then there's the danger. You set aside the floral water and pick up a small tin of scented salve. You rub a bit on your temples, then pause. You remember hearing that some perfumes contained benzene, chloroform, even arsenic. No one really checks. No one really knows. But the tingle in your nose, the slight sting in your eyes, that can't be good. Still, the alternative is worse. You tuck the bottles away, covering them with a scrap of linen to keep the sun off. You reach for your gloves, your hat. You take one last look at the room with its faded rug and yellowing curtains, and you open the door. Outside, the city surges. Footsteps shouting the clatter of wheels over cobblestone. A waft of smoke and damp earth hits you immediately, and you walk forward into it, a trail of lilies and lilac drifting in your wake. You are one of thousands today, thousands of women stepping out into a city that doesn't wash, doesn't sanitize, doesn't care. But you smell like roses. You smell like you tried. And sometimes that's the only armor you have. By the time night falls, you're more tired than you are clean. Your arms ache from the weight of your own clothing. Your skin prickles beneath layers of wool and corsetry, and your breath rises visibly in the cold air of your unheated room. It's been a long day of trying to look composed, smell pleasant, and carry on like all this discomfort isn't stitched into every inch of your petticoats. But now, at last, it's time to rest. You lift the candle holder, the little brass one you keep by the bed, and the wick flickers as you exhale. The light casts a feeble circle on the wall, revealing the shadows of lace curtains, cracked plaster, and the gentle arch of dust motes swirling in the chill. You approach the bed, and already you can feel it, the familiar resistance of linen that hasn't seen soap in a while. The sheets are stiff, a little oily to the touch, and they carry that unmistakable scent, body oils, stale air, and faint mildew from the perpetual damp. Changing bed linens is no small task. There's no tossing things into a machine and pressing a button. Washing day is an ordeal scheduled like a military campaign. Water must be hauled and heated. Linen boiled, beaten, wrung out, stretched. If you're lucky, you might afford a laundress to help, though the results depend heavily on her mood and the state of the river. More likely, you do it yourself, or share the work with sisters, cousins, or housemates. And so bed linens become a sort of seasonal rotation, changed only when the grime becomes unbearable, or when visitors are expected. You peel back the heavy quilt, revealing layers beneath woolen blankets, ticking mattress, and, at the bottom, a feather bed if you're fortunate. The feather bed sags in the middle like a soup bowl, And once you lie down, the stuffing shifts around your body, creating a kind of cocoon that's both warm and stifling. You nestle in, and the sheets embrace you with the familiarity of a coat worn too long. Mainstream historical fact. In Victorian homes, laundry, particularly linens, was typically done once every few weeks, often less. This was due to the sheer labor involved, the limited access to water and heat, and the cultural norms of the time, which considered visible cleanliness more important than actual sanitation. Many households designated one day every few weeks as washing day, during which all work paused to accommodate the overwhelming task of laundering clothes and linens by hand. The smell of your bedding isn't shocking anymore. It's just part of life. Everyone smells like something. The trick is managing it, layering over it, and above all, never acknowledging it in polite company. You turn your head to the side, and the pillowcase crackles faintly as your cheek sinks in. It smells faintly of hair oil, of the rosewater you dabbed on your temples this morning, and something sourer you'd rather not name. Above your head hangs a tiny sachet, a muslin pouch filled with dried lavender sewn shut with crooked stitches. It's a little ritual meant to keep the worst smells at bay. The scent has long since faded, but you keep it there for the illusion of cleanliness, the same way you keep the chipped porcelain bowl on the washstand full of yesterday's water. In this world, appearances are everything. Sleep, when it comes, must be coaxed through layers of discomfort. Quirky detail. In poorer households, or for those without access to an outdoor drying line, wet laundry, especially personal items like menstrual rags or undergarments, was hung behind furniture under beds, or even inside wardrobes to dry in private. Bedrooms often doubled as makeshift laundries, their air thick with damp cloth and steam. It wasn't uncommon to fall asleep beneath a canopy of drying linens, the scent of wet wool lingering in your nostrils. You shift under the covers, trying not to think about how many nights you've slept in these same sheets. Your nightdress, once white, is a soft gray now, not from dye, but from the long, slow accumulation of wear sweat and soap that doesn't quite do its job. You didn't change it tonight, or the night before. It's your sleeping uniform, your one concession to modesty in a world where privacy is fleeting and personal comfort comes last. Historians still argue whether the Victorian era's obsession with etiquette was a form of social control or a genuine attempt to impose order on a world teetering between industrial chaos and moral panic. What's clear is that much of what passed for hygiene was performative. Fresh cuffs, a starched collar, a well-brushed bonnet, these things mattered more than whether you'd actually cleaned the skin beneath them. The laundry was part of this performance, symbolic more than sanitary. Some nights, you dream of clean things. Crisp linen sheets billowing in the wind, sun-warmed towels, a pillow that smells only of cotton and clouds. But mostly, you dream of nothing. Exhaustion is its own kind of mercy. You turn again, curling toward the colder side of the mattress, and listen to the sounds of the house settling around you, the creak of beams, the sigh of wind beneath the door. Somewhere in the dark, someone coughs, a wet rattling sound that cuts through the silence, like a bell. The walls here are thin, the sickness always near. You press your hand to your chest and close your eyes, hoping the night is kind. You'll rise again in the morning, unwrap yourself from these heavy blankets, and go once more to the pitcher and bowl. Another day begins, and you still haven't truly washed. But your dress will be brushed, your gloves will be on, and your lavender sachet will swing gently beside your bed like a talisman. Because, in this life, that's close enough to clean. The sun peeks through paper screens, casting long rectangular shadows across the floor. The tatami beneath your feet is smooth but cold, and as you slide back the shoji panel, the soft rustle of the garden greets you. Bamboo leaves trembling in the breeze, the distant clatter of Geta sandals on a stone path. The year is 1772. You are a woman of Edo, Japan, and your life, like the sleeves of your corset, is bound tightly in ritual and expectation. There's a basin in the corner, wooden shallow still holding the cooled water from last night's wash. You know better than to reach for it today, because today is not for cleansing. Your time of the month has begun, and with it, an invisible curtain drops. You are considered impure. The temples are off limits. Ritual baths are forbidden. Even in your own home, there's a quiet pullback, the sense that you are separate. Not in exile, exactly, but distant. You move slowly through the room, careful not to disturb the quiet. Your movements are practiced deliberate. Your sleeves drag gracefully behind you, your obi tied precisely pressing against your lower back, like a reminder to stand upright and look composed. Beneath the outer elegance is the same discomfort carried by women. Across every century, cramps that tug at your stomach fabric, that binds too tight. And a silence around the body you're supposed to pretend isn't happening. Mainstream historical fact. In Edo period Japan, menstruating women were commonly considered impure in Shinto belief systems, leading to a number of cultural taboos. Women were discouraged or outright prohibited from entering shrines handling sacred objects or bathing in communal onsen hot springs during menstruation. These beliefs shaped daily routines, limited mobility, and reinforced gendered ideas of bodily pollution and purity. While individual enforcement varied by class and region, the restriction was real enough to shape how women moved through public and private life. Instead of bathing, you take up a small cloth soaked in warm water and wipe your face and neck. That's the extent of your hygiene today. You're not alone in this. Your sisters, your neighbors, the women in nearby houses, they follow the same unspoken rules. At least water is plentiful here. But if you're poor, bathing, even when you're allowed, means heating water over a charcoal fire. Or worse, over a fire fueled by dried cow dung, if you live in the countryside. You try not to think about that. The real business of the morning, however, lies in the little wooden box sitting beside the mirror stand. Inside is your ohaguro, your tooth blackening kit. Iron filings dissolved in vinegar mixed with tea or sake, creating a black lacquer that you carefully brush onto your teeth. It's sticky, pungent metallic. You dip the brush and lift it to your lips and paint. One tooth at a time. The result is a shining black smile, gleaming tar-like, unmistakable. To you, this isn't strange. It's beautiful. It means you are married, loyal, mature, a proper woman. For centuries, blackened teeth have symbolized refinement and virtue in Japan, especially among married women and geisha. Men sometimes did it too, but for women, it's practically required after marriage. White teeth are for children. Black teeth are for those who understand duty. Quirky detail. The practice of ohaguro didn't just serve a symbolic purpose. Some historians believe it also helped prevent tooth decay. The iron acetate compound formed a coating that was resistant to rot, an early form of protective enamel. Still, the aesthetic was startling to outsiders. European visitors to Japan in the 19th century often described the look as ghastly or monstrous, not understanding its cultural significance. But to a Japanese woman, in Edo, blackened teeth were just part of the morning routine. You smile into the mirror, adjusting your lip line to see if any black has smudged. It's a careful balance. Too much, and it looks like soot. Too little, and the shine doesn't show. You dab the corners with a cloth and press your mouth closed. The vinegar lingers on your breath, sharp and sour, mixing with the faint scent of camellia oil you combed through your hair earlier. There's no soap here, not in the Western sense. What you use is more natural, more ritualistic. Powdered rice bran for your skin, fermented sake residue as a toner, camellia oil to cleanse and moisturize. If you bathed yesterday, before your menstruation, you might have rubbed your body with a coarse cloth and ladled warm water over your shoulders, letting it wash down over the cedar slat floor. But today, your body remains wrapped and untouched. The silence around menstruation is almost total. No one speaks of it. Not even mothers to daughters. The knowledge is passed silently, body to body, cloth to cloth. Historians still argue whether the menstruation taboos in Edo Japan were more religious or hygienic in origin. Some trace them to early Shinto ideas of purity, while others suggest they reflected practical concerns about blood in shared bathing water. Either way, the result was the same: women withdrew, adapted, endured. There was no discussion, no protest, just acceptance stitched into the seams of the kimono. You step outside into the small courtyard, feeling the warmth of the sun finally reach your skin. It's peaceful here. Stone lanterns, bamboo fences, a koi pond dappled with orange. You move quietly past the garden toward the wooden corridor where your mother waits. She nods at your blackened teeth, her own gleaming slightly in the light. No words are needed. The ritual is complete. You are prepared for the day. There's something deeply intimate about this routine, something quietly defiant. In a world where your body is both sacred and shamed, these moments of preparation feel like acts of quiet power. You are expected to be modest, but polished, hidden, but radiant. And through your effort, the brushing, the oiling, the pressing, you claim some small control over how the world will see you. Later, as the day drifts forward, you'll work in the home, prepare rice fold linens, perhaps meet with women from the neighborhood, and all the while, you'll carry this strange knowledge that your body, though invisible in polite society, is carrying on its ancient rhythm, that the things you cannot say are still real, and that your black smile, your perfumed sleeves, your composed silence are all part of a performance older than memory. Section 10. The early light filters in softly through the silk screen, casting faint lotus-shaped shadows across the floor. You shift beneath layers of brocade and cotton, the rustle of fabric, the only sound in the stillness. Outside, a courtyard stirs with the sound of a servant brushing fallen petals into neat piles. The year is 1743. You are a woman of the Qing dynasty, and nothing about your life, your skin, your scent, your hands is meant to suggest labor. To touch a broom, to stir a pot, to lift even your teacup too quickly, these would be small betrayals of your place in the world. Your first action of the morning is not to rise, but to wait. A maid approaches quietly, bearing a porcelain bowl filled with water that smells faintly sweet rice water, fermented overnight in a lidded jar. Its surface gleams with tiny bubbles, and the scent is familiar, comforting. You've used it for years. There is no bar of soap, no lather. In this house, soap is a harsh intruder. You cleanse with softness-infused water, ground herbs, rice bran pastes, rubbed delicately across the skin. You reach out slowly, not because you are tired, but because your fingernails are long. Ridiculously long, in fact, nearly 2 inches beyond your fingertips, curled ever so slightly at the ends. Your pinky nail is the longest of all, wrapped in a protective gold case enameled with chrysanthemums. You did not grow them for beauty, though they are beautiful. You grew them to prove something, to display at every gesture that you do not work. Mainstream historical fact. During the Qing dynasty, long fingernails were a clear symbol of high social status among women and some men. They indicated that the wearer performed no manual labor, no cooking, no cleaning, not even dressing themselves. Wealthy women would grow their nails long and protect them with ornate nail guards made of gold, silver, or ivory, often encrusted with jade or other precious stones. These were as much about prestige as they were about appearance, a way of literally embodying class. Lifting the cloth to your face, you dab gently at your cheeks and forehead with the cool, milky water. Fermented rice water has been passed down for generations, believed to soften the skin, reduce wrinkles, and bring out the natural glow. Your grandmother used it. Her mother too. It is said that the court women in the Forbidden City used it daily, and though you don't live behind palace walls, you follow their example as closely as you can. You study your reflection in the bronze mirror. It distorts slightly, the edges dimmed with age. But you know what? You'll see a complexion lightened with pearl powder, lips tinted subtly with crushed flower petals, and beneath it all the pale, calm mask expected of you. To be a proper woman is to look composed no matter what storms stir beneath the surface. Quirky detail. Some Qing women use swan fat as a base for their cosmetics, blending it with finely ground herbs, pearls, or minerals. It was thought to give the skin a luminous quality. Beauty was both art and alchemy, a collection of hand-mixed concoctions stored in delicate porcelain pots, passed from mother to daughter with careful instructions and whispered secrets. Today, you feel the weight of your nails in every movement. You cannot lace your own robe or brush your own hair. These things are done for you not just out of courtesy, but necessity. To preserve your nails, your servants perform the rituals of your morning combing your hair with a bone comb, pinning it into a graceful chignon, threading jade hairpins through with care. As they work, you sit silently watching the garden through the screen. The camellias are blooming again, pale pink clustered in heavy blossoms. You remember the story your nursemaid once told of how Empress Dowager Cixi once had an entire room filled with camellias just so she could paint them by candlelight. You wonder if it's true. It could be. The Empress is said to sleep on rose petals and bathe in milk. Compared to that, your rice water seems almost rustic. Historians still argue whether the extensive grooming rituals of elite Qing women were expressions of power or prisons of propriety. Some view them as acts of self-care and artistry, ways to exert control in a world ruled by men. Others see them as enforced stillness cages gilded with pearl dust and hair oil. Whatever the truth, what remains undeniable is the discipline and entire life lived in small, graceful gestures. You feel a tug at your sleeve as your maid finishes dressing you. The robe today is embroidered with clouds and crane symbols of longevity and grace. Your hands rest delicately in your lap, the nail guards catching the morning light. Soon, you'll receive visitors, your cousin perhaps, or a merchant's wife seeking advice on a marriage match. You'll pour tea you didn't steep, offer sweets you didn't prepare, and smile with lips you painted an hour ago. Throughout the day, you'll carry yourself like a scroll, being unrolled, each step a line of poetry, each nod a brushstroke. Your nails will never chip, your hair will never fall, and your face, freshly dabbed in fermented water, will remain smooth, cool, unreadable. By sunset, your body will ache not from effort, but from the tension of stillness. Your nails will throb slightly from the pressure of the guards. And as your robe is unpinned and your hair let down, you'll sigh. Quietly, almost invisibly. Then you'll wash again. Not to remove dirt, but to realign with the day's rituals. A second bowl of rice water is brought. It's a little warmer now, a little more fragrant. You dip your cloth once more. The scent clings faintly to your skin, soft, sour, sweet, familiar. And with it, you let go of the performance, if only for a moment. You sit absolutely still as the hairdresser adjusts your head, tilting it ever so slightly to the left, just enough for him to reach behind the towering nest of powdered curls perched above your forehead. He mutters softly in a sing-song cadence, smoothing, pinning, puffing with quick flourishes. His hands move like a pastry chef's, and in a way, this is pastry, just not the kind you eat. Your wig is enormous, towering, almost absurd. And yet, it's the standard for a well-bred woman in 1770s France, and you wouldn't dream of leaving your chambers without it. The process began 2 hours ago. First, your own hair, long, dark, and inconvenient, was flattened, tied back tightly, and pinned into a sad little bun near the nape of your neck. Then came the wig horsehair, and human hair twisted together and woven into a frame lifted off your scalp and set just so. It's powdered, of course. White, always white. That's the fashion. Whiteness suggests age wisdom status and a certain detachment from manual labor, from sun and soil and effort. You are effortless. At least that's the illusion. You close your eyes for a moment. The air is thick with the smell of starch talc lavender. Underneath it, something less pleasant, sweat perhaps, or oil, or the faint trace of whatever decided to make a home in your wig last week. Mainstream historical fact. In 18th century France, particularly under the Ancien regime, wigs often powdered white were an essential part of elite fashion. Both men and women wore them, and for women, they could become elaborate confections several feet tall. These wigs were not cleaned regularly and were rarely taken off, sometimes remaining on the head for weeks. Powder was made from starch, often wheat or rice flour, mixed with perfumes like lavender or orange blossom. Lice infestations were common, and head scratchers or long pins were kept handy to deal with the movement. The powder isn't just for looks, it's also a kind of disguise-scented starchy camouflage to hide the fact that underneath hygiene is, well, negotiable. You haven't bathed this week, maybe not even last week. Bathing is considered dangerous. Doctors say hot water opens the pores, lets in bad humors, weakens your constitution. So instead, you freshen up with rosewater, strong vinegar, or alcohol-based tonics. You dab them under your arms, behind your ears, between your toes. That's considered enough. Your maid brings in your toilette tray, an elegant spread of flasks, brushes, linen cloths, and rouge pots. You sip cooled tisane from a delicate porcelain cup, while she powders your chest, patting the soft starch onto your décolletage with rhythmic precision. You resist the urge to sneeze. The powder floats everywhere in your lashes, in your tea, in the pleats of your dress. But that's the cost of civility. Quirky detail. Some women in 18th century France placed tiny live mice in their wigs to eat the lice that nested there. This practice, while not widespread, was known enough to inspire ridicule in satirical art and theater. More common, though still unusual, was the application of crawling powder, a blend of herbs and powdered mercury meant to poison lice. It worked. At a price. Mercury exposure could cause tremors, hallucinations, or worse. Your dress today is particularly wide. The hoops span nearly 4 feet, brushing the sides of the doorframe as you pass. Beneath it, you wear layers, petticoats, corsets, chemises. None of these items have been washed recently, and some never will be. Laundering delicate fabrics is both risky and expensive. Stains are hidden under new embroidery. Odors are combated with perfume and sweat, while you simply learn to live with it. It's nearly time for your carriage. You descend the stairs carefully, mindful of your balance. The wig adds several inches to your height, and your shoes, tiny silk things with wooden heels, offer very little grip. Outside, the air smells of horse dung and warm bread. Paris is always a contradiction. In the salon, you sip wine and fan yourself slowly. The conversation is sparkling, though carefully curated, discussing the latest novel, the scandal of the court, the shifting winds of politics that whisper of revolution. You laugh softly, never too loudly always, behind a gloved hand. Your movements are graceful, studied. A single bead of sweat traces down your spine, caught by linen and forgotten. Historians still argue whether the extravagance of elite hygiene in pre-revolutionary France was a reflection of power or a mask for decay. Some suggest that the layered perfumes and elaborate wigs were a way to ignore the rot beneath, the literal rot of unwashed bodies and rotting systems. Others believe it was an art form, a culture of presentation so refined that discomfort itself became invisible. Whichever view you take, the result was the same appearance mattered more than reality. By late afternoon, your face has been retouched 3 times, your wig repowdered twice. You're growing tired not from activity, but from maintenance. You excuse yourself early, citing a headache, the kind that comes from too much rouge and too little ventilation. Back home, your maid helps you disassemble the day. The wig is placed carefully on its stand, and you examine your scalp. There are small bites again, just above your ear. You'll need the crawling powder tonight, just a pinch rubbed behind the hairline. You try not to think about what it does to the blood. You sit at your dressing table, the candlelight soft and flattering. Your reflection looks back at you, painted powdered precise. But underneath your scalp itches. Your skin stings. Your chest is sticky where the starch met sweat. You lift your chemise and see the familiar red lines of the corset the way it's pressed into your ribs. You are by all accounts beautiful, but also tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep cures, but the kind that builds over years of perfection. Still, you wouldn't trade places. At least, not yet. You sip your wine dab rosewater on your temples and settle into the high, upholstered bed. The sheets are clean, freshly aired at least, and the linen smells faintly of lavender sachets and pressed petals. The wig rests beside you like a sleeping animal. And as you close your eyes, you think about tomorrow. Another salon, another round of powdered performance. But for now, you breathe deeply. Powder and petals and just a trace of mouse. The scent hits you first. It's not entirely unpleasant, not at first. Dried lavender, maybe, or rosemary stuffed into a little sachet and tied with a scrap of ribbon tucked into the neckline of your gown. But beneath that, there's something older, muskier. The smell of wool that's been worn too many times and never washed. Of damp stone of wood smoke and the faintest trace of something like dust and sweat and prayers. You're a woman in medieval Europe, and this is the cleanest you'll feel all week. The room is dark. Even in the middle of the day, the thick stone walls keep the sun out. Your chamber has no glass windows, just slits for air and the flutter of candlelight. The linens on your bed are coarse and rough against your skin. You rise slowly, blinking in the gloom, and the chill of the flagstone floor immediately finds your feet. You don't bathe. Not today. Not this week. Probably not next either. Not unless something significant happens. Bathing, you've been told, opens the pores, weakens the spirit, invites illness. Water is not your friend. Mainstream historical fact. In many parts of medieval Europe, especially after the early centuries of the Middle Ages, regular bathing fell out of favor, particularly among the devout. The church promoted the idea that bodily cleanliness could lead to spiritual corruption, encouraging the faithful to focus on inner purity rather than outward appearances. Public bathhouses were often associated with sin or promiscuity, and many were shut down. The belief that water opened the body to disease, especially after the Black Death, led people to avoid washing altogether. Perfumed herbs oils and powders became substitutes for actual bathing. So, instead of washing, you anoint. A little lavender sachet pinned into your underclothes, a smear of rose oil behind the ears. If you're lucky enough to be wealthy, your linen chemise may be lightly dusted with crushed orris root, a kind of early deodorant. Your hair is combed, not cleaned, and you wear it in a braid coiled beneath a veil or a crespin net. The veil is partly modesty, partly strategy. It keeps the worst of the day at bay. The chamber pot, discreetly placed behind a curtain, hasn't been emptied since yesterday. It's not full, not yet, but the smell reminds you it soon will be. You try not to inhale deeply as you pass. You've grown used to it, more or less. You make a mental note to send a servant to dispose of it later into the yard, most likely, or the communal cesspit if it's market day. If it's raining, maybe just out the window. Nobody asks questions about such things. You dress layer by layer, linen shift wool gown, perhaps a decorative overgown with embroidery that's now more threadbare than ornate. The clothes are heavy, and after weeks of wear, they've absorbed everything. Sweat smoke, the scent of the people you've sat beside, in chapel or at table. Washing them would be an ordeal, involving boiling water, lye soap, and hours of scrubbing by hand. So, you don't wash. You mask. Quirky detail 1. Popular practice among the very pious was the wearing of holy dirt, small pouches of earth from sacred sites believed to ward off illness and evil. These pouches were worn close to the skin, sometimes sewn into undergarments or strung around the neck. Unfortunately, the combination of dirt sweat and tightly packed linen did very little for hygiene. In fact, in some cases, it may have worsened infections. But the belief in its power was strong, and people clung to the idea of divine protection, even when the scent turned less than divine. Downstairs, a fire smolders in the hearth. You break your fast with a piece of coarse bread and a bit of cheese sipping weak ale. The air is smoky. Your eyes sting slightly. Smoke is constant here in every room, clinging to the thatch, the beams your gown. It seeps into your skin until your own scent is indistinguishable from the hearth. But again, this is comfort in a way. Familiar. Anchoring. The smoke keeps the insects away, or so they say. It might even keep the plague from your door if you burn the right herbs in the right season. You take your place by the window slit sewing or spinning as the hours slip by. There's little to do, but work with your hands. When your fingertips grow raw, you press them into beeswax. When your eyes grow heavy, you light a bit of tallow and keep going. Your hands are never entirely clean, not by modern standards. There's always a trace of dirt beneath the nails, a smudge of ash along the knuckle. Water is for drinking, not for scrubbing. Historians still argue whether medieval people were truly dirty by choice or by necessity. Some records suggest that access to clean water was more widespread than previously thought, especially in monasteries and Islamic cities. Others argue that the abandonment of Roman-style public baths and the rise of church doctrine made regular hygiene both logistically and morally difficult. Either way, by the high Middle Ages, daily washing of the whole body had become rare in many European communities, though washing the hands and face remained more common, especially before meals or prayers. Evening falls slowly in this world. You light a candle made of tallow, it sputters and smells faintly of animal fat. You wave away the moth that flutters near its flame. The scent of lavender is long gone, now overpowered by the richer notes of human life wool and skin and sour breath. You kneel beside your bed to say your prayers. You do this every night more out of habit than conviction. A whispered plea for protection, for health, for no rats in the rafters. You tuck the sachet into your pillowcase, hoping it masks the mustiness. You lie down on straw-stuffed bedding, turning once, twice, trying to find the part that doesn't poke. Somewhere a dog barks, somewhere a neighbor coughs, but here in this room, you are still in your layered gown, still under your veil, still waiting for morning and the next day of dryness. But even this was considered blessed in its way. You weren't sick. You had clothes. You had enough to eat more or less. You had lavender, the night is long and the bed is hard. The fire downstairs has gone out and the chill creeps up from the floor through the stones, through your mattress, through your bones. You wake once, maybe twice, shivering and confused, unsure if it's closer to dawn or just the deepest part of night. There's no clock to check, only the silence. You roll over, breathing in the smell of old wool and lavender crushed into your pillow. This is rest as close as you'll get to comfort. By morning, the world hasn't changed. The church bell tolls faintly in the distance, matins or lauds, depending on how devout your household is. You rise again, not because you feel rested, but because there's no option to linger. Sleep in too long, and the chores will be waiting anyway, colder and meaner than before. You rinse your face with a bit of yesterday's water, now cloudy, a little slimy around the edges, and dry it on a sleeve. You smooth your veil, pull your gown tighter, and step into another day of modesty and mystery. You pass a servant in the hall carrying a bundle of rushes. These aren't just for decoration. The rushes are strewn across the floors to absorb spills, dirt, and the daily slough of life. But they're not changed often. Sometimes, fragrant herbs like mint lavender or chamomile are mixed in, not to clean the floor, but to mask the decay beneath. Over time, these rushes grow thick and layered, creating soft paths that seem almost warm. Until you remember, they're full of food scraps, vermin, and everything your feet have dragged in from the streets. You might pause to sniff a posy, a small bouquet of herbs you keep on your belt or in your sleeve. It's both status and shield. You hold it to your nose when walking through crowded markets, or past the tanner's quarter, or anywhere you suspect death might be lingering in the air, because you've been told that foul smells are dangerous. That illness rides on the breeze like a demon, and sweet-smelling herbs can keep it at bay. Mainstream historical fact. The miasma theory, the belief that disease was caused by bad air or unpleasant odors, dominated European medical thinking well into the 17th and 18th centuries. This theory guided much of daily hygiene in the medieval era. People didn't understand germs, but they feared smells. That's why physicians wore beaked masks stuffed with spices during plagues, and why nobles surrounded themselves with scented sachets burning incense and perfumed oils. Cleanliness wasn't about sanitation, it was about aroma and avoiding what they believed to be poisoned air. You visit a neighbor later in the morning, stepping carefully over the puddles and refuse in the street. There's no organized waste collection, just the hope that rain will wash things away. You lift your skirts and make your way across slick stones, careful not to trip. Inside her home, the smells are similar, smoke will old food. But there's comfort in it. Familiarity. She offers you a seat near the hearth and pours something warm into a wooden cup. You sip it gratefully, not because it tastes good, but because it's warm and shared. She shows you her latest needlework prayers stitched in Latin, the words curling into the fabric like spells. She's been too tired to finish. She's been coughing. You both pretend not to notice. Illness is too common to fear openly. She fingers the sachet at her breast, and you do the same. Maybe today it'll help. You speak in hushed tones about the baker's wife who has stopped going to church, about the neighbor's daughter who was sent away. The veil of hygiene in this world is also the veil of propriety. You keep up appearances, keep wearing the sachets, keep sweeping the rushes, keep quiet. As the day draws on, the air grows heavier. There's a kind of weight to the afternoons here, when the fire burns low and the shadows stretch long. You return home and start your evening rituals. A bit of bread, a bowl of broth if you're lucky. Then candlelight and quiet. No evening strolls, no long baths, no refreshing routines. Just the same clothes, the same bed, the same prayer. Quirky detail. Some women especially, those considered particularly pious, believed that touching sacred relics, or even wearing small pieces of them, could provide both spiritual protection and physical healing. Tiny splinters of bone from saints, threads from holy garments, even flakes of dried blood were encased in pendants and pinned to underclothes. These relics were worn close to the skin where they absorbed sweat and dirt along with their supposed blessings. Though unhygienic by today's standards, they were deeply cherished and passed down for generations. Historians still argue whether these practices were acts of sincere faith or societal pressure disguised as devotion. Did women believe in the protective power of holy dirt and relics? Or were they simply performing a role assigned to them, pious, modest, ever-enduring? The line between belief and survival, between spiritual discipline and social expectation, is often blurred in the records. You lie down again, back on the straw-stuffed mattress arms folded over your chest like you've seen statues do. You breathe slowly through your mouth, less smell that way, and you think about the next market day, about the coming feast, about whether this winter will be better than the last. Somewhere in your chest, beneath the layers of cloth and oil and holy herbs, there's a quiet strength. Not because your world is clean, but because you endure it. The sachet under your pillow is faint now, just a whisper of lavender, a sigh of rosemary. But it's enough. You wake not in a bed, but on a wooden couch, your linen tunic twisted slightly, the breeze from a half-open shutter stirring the heavy air. The sunlight outside is already golden warm and dry, stretching over the red-tiled roofs of the domus and climbing down into the atrium, where your day will begin. This is Rome Imperial, crowded, fragrant, and louder than you'd like first thing in the morning. But that doesn't matter. Today, like every other day, you have a date with your daily ritual. Not prayer, not coffee. The baths. It sounds luxurious, especially compared to what we've seen so far. And it is, in a way. But don't get too comfortable. You're still going to scrape the dirt from your body with a blunt bronze blade, sit beside strangers on heated stone benches, and listen to the gurgle of water that's far murkier than you'd hope. Cleanliness here is less about solitude and soap, and more about oil sweat and social performance. You gather your things, a small flask of olive oil, a linen cloth, a wooden comb, and your strigil, a curved blade dull and smooth made to glide along skin and carry away the mixture of oil grime and whatever the city has left on your limbs. The oil isn't perfumed, unless you're wealthy, but it's enough. Romans believe that oil nourishes the skin and draws out impurities. Water comes later. First, you must oil yourself like a roast in preparation. The walk to the baths is noisy. You pass fishmongers shouting over their buckets, children darting between carts, the scent of garlic and vinegar wafting from a nearby taberna. There's dust, there's heat, and there's always the faint undertone of sewage, because Rome, for all its aqueducts and genius, hasn't quite solved street waste. But you're used to it. The smell is the background music of city life. You enter the thermi, the public baths, not alone, but with dozens, sometimes hundreds of others. The building is enormous vaulted ceilings, tiled mosaic steam rising from open pools, voices echoing off the marble. It's not a private spa, it's a public square, a gym, a gossip hall, a place where senators and slaves might technically share the same water, though not at the same time, and never in the same condition. You disrobe in the apoditerium, the changing room, and hand your clothes to a young attendant. You hope he watches them carefully. Theft is common here, and unless you've paid off the right slave or chained your sandals to the bench, you might leave the bathhouse with fewer belongings than you brought in. Then it's time for the warm room, the tepidarium. The air is thick, the tiles damp beneath your feet. Your skin already begins to sweat, and that's the point. You oil your limbs slowly, the flask warm from the journey. The oil spreads easily, covering dust, softening calluses. Then comes the strigil. You scrape gently up the legs, down the arms, across the chest. It doesn't hurt, but it's not exactly soothing either. The sensation is intimate, methodical. The dirty oil rolls off in ribbons, and you wipe the blade between strokes. Mainstream historical fact. Roman baths weren't just for washing, they were centers of community hygiene and even medicine. Archaeological evidence from places like Pompeii and Herculaneum shows complex water heating systems, ventilation shafts, and even embedded drainage beneath the caldarium floors. Physicians sometimes maintained rooms near the baths offering advice and treatments. For many, this was the only medical care they'd receive. And though soap wasn't used, the combination of oiling, scraping, and bathing was considered effective for both health and social cleanliness. Eventually, you move into the caldarium, the hot room. This is where the heat coils in your lungs, and your pores open wide. The water steams in a large basin shadowed with age and the faint mineral sheen of use. You don't swim, not exactly. You sit, you soak, you sweat. You listen. Because the baths are where information flows. Marriages arranged, contracts whispered, scandals dissected. Someone says a senator's son has gone missing. Someone else mutters about the grain ships arriving late. A woman next to you rubs her temples with myrrh and says the stars are unkind this month. You don't speak much. It's better to listen. Quirky detail. Some wealthier Romans had personal bath slaves whose job was to apply oil, operate the strigil, and even pluck stray hairs with tweezers. One elite woman reportedly had her bath servant whisper compliments during grooming, an ancient form of self-care affirmation. These slaves memorized grooming routines, preferred oils, and even tolerated the moods of their mistress. Roman cleanliness at the upper levels was not just about hygiene. It was theatrical, ritualized, a performance that required an audience. When you're finished in the hot room, your skin is flushed and soft. The final rinse comes in the frigidarium, a plunge into cold water that shocks you back to reality. You don't linger here. Just a quick immersion to tighten the pores, awaken the limbs, and hopefully rinse off any last remnants of oil. Then, it's back to the apoditerium, where you retrieve your tunic, now slightly damp from the steam. You comb your hair. You might apply a touch of perfume, though not too much. In Rome, scent is a social code. Too strong, and you're signaling indulgence, possibly even scandal. Just a hint, and you're properly modest. Respectable. Roman. Historians still argue whether Roman bathhouses were truly egalitarian or simply reinforced existing hierarchies. Yes, they were public. Yes, access was theoretically universal. But separate bathing times for men and women distinctions, inequality between private and public thermae, and even the layout of changing rooms suggest that class and status still governed the experience. Were the baths a great equalizer or just another stage for performance? You step outside, into the sun again, the heat now feeling gentler against your freshly scraped skin. You feel clean, or at least cleaner, but also exposed. Your pores are wide, your limbs soft, and your mind strangely quiet. It's not the kind of cleanliness you recognize from the modern world. There's no foamy lather, no citrus-scented soap, no soft towel waiting on a warm rack. But there is ritual, there is care, there is community. And that's what passes for hygiene in ancient Rome. Later in the day, after your visit to the thermae, your body carries the residual warmth of the caldarium, the faint aroma of olive oil clinging to your skin. You've returned to your household, or perhaps stopped for bread or garum in the market, and you're beginning to settle into the rhythm of Roman domestic life. The bath wasn't just hygiene. It was the axis around which everything else rotated. Meetings, meals, meditation all sequenced around the moment of oil and strigil. You may not realize it, but what you've just done, this entire process of scraping and sweating and socializing, is also tied up in Rome's political identity. Cleanliness here isn't private, it's collective. When emperors built elaborate public bathhouses like Caracalla's massive complex with its vaulted ceilings and sprawling gymnasiums, it wasn't just civic generosity, it was a declaration of control. The state gives you water, the state gives you order. And in exchange, you behave. You show up. You participate. Of course, there are rules. There are always rules. Mixed gender bathing is allowed in some places, forbidden in others, tolerated briefly before being condemned again. Religious thinkers, even in pre-Christian Rome, grumble about decadence and excess. They say the baths are too sensual, too permissive. That morality is slipping down the drain like yesterday's olive oil. But most people ignore them. The baths are too embedded in daily life, too necessary. What's more interesting is what happens when you don't or can't participate. The poor who live in Rome's insulae, the overcrowded apartment blocks, don't always have access to the grand bathhouses. They might rely on smaller, cheaper balneae, less polished, less ornate, often tucked between alleyways and markets. The experience is the same, in theory oil scrape rinse. But the company is different. No senators here, no marble statues, just workers, porters, slaves, still human, still deserving of cleanliness, though the tools may be rougher and the oil thinner. Mainstream historical fact. The Roman public bathing system was one of the most advanced in the ancient world, with aqueducts transporting water from distant springs into the city and distributed through complex piping systems. The largest complexes, like the Baths of Diocletian, could serve thousands of visitors daily. Engineers built hypocauste systems, an early form of radiant floor heating that funneled hot air beneath the stone floors to warm rooms from below. These innovations made Roman baths not just architectural marvels, but central pillars of urban infrastructure. But they also required constant maintenance. Fires had to be kept burning. Water channels needed clearing. Attendants scraped floors, swept fallen hair, and emptied used oil. The elegance of the baths rested on invisible labor. And like so much else in Rome, it was gendered labor. Women, especially slaves and freed women, were often employed in the background of these institutions, not as bathers, but as washers, oil mixers, even perfumers. Their hygiene didn't take place in marble rooms with mosaics. It was in shadowed corners, crouched beside cisterns, reusing water long after it had lost its clarity. Quirky detail Romans were so committed to the ideal of fresh breath that they developed their own tooth powders, often made from crushed bones, oyster shells, and occasionally ashes mixed with flavoring like mint or charcoal. Some elite women were said to use urine imported from Portugal, prized for its ammonia content, as a bleaching agent for teeth. It sounds horrifying now, but at the time, it was seen as scientific, even fashionable. And yes, you could buy these powders at the baths from vendors who sold grooming tools, perfumes, jewelry, and sometimes less savory things. The line between bathhouse and brothel was thin in certain districts. Not all socializing was innocent. And not all oil came from olives. Historians still debate how central the baths were to women's lives in practice. Literary sources often mention male experiences, the philosophical debates, the business deals, the politics. But female participation was usually limited, scattered across different hours or buildings. In some eras, women had their own dedicated hours. In others, they were excluded entirely. Archaeological finds, like hairpins and jewelry in women's changing rooms, suggest regular use. But the historical record remains skewed. Were the baths a place of empowerment for Roman women, or just another stage where they performed cleanliness for the comfort of others? You begin to dry your skin. There's no towel, just a cloth thin and roughly woven left in the sun to dry. You stretch out in the atrium or by a small brazier, letting the heat finish the job. Your skin smells faintly of herbs. If you were lucky enough to afford scented oil today, perhaps rosemary or a pinch of marjoram. It's a clean feeling, but not sterile. It's warm, bodily, unmistakably human. And in this world, that's what clean means. As evening comes, you think again about the strange trade-offs of ancient hygiene. No soap, no hot showers, no toothbrushes, but also no shame in the body. No locked doors. Cleanliness was expected, yes, but not in the sanitized, invisible way of the modern world. It was public, collective, loud. Your sweat was a signal, your scent a story. You couldn't hide, but you could belong. And that more than anything was what the baths offered membership in the Roman world. You stretch your arms. Let your eyes close. Imagine the echo of the marble chamber, the hiss of the steam, the scrape of the strigil. The city is still out there, dust swirling in the streets, vendors calling to each other across market stalls, the aqueducts humming softly overhead like arteries of the empire. Tomorrow, you'll bathe again. The Nile speaks even when it's still. Before you open your eyes, you can feel it, the slow breath of the water, the heat beginning to rise from the earth, and the grainy whisper of sand against limestone walls. Morning in ancient Egypt does not rush. It creeps, it simmers, and it begins as so many things here do with ritual. The sun Ra will soon climb his celestial bark. The fields will glint under his gaze. But for you, the day begins in your chamber, dim and fragrant, where hygiene is as much spiritual offering as bodily need. You rise slowly from a low mat layered in linen. The air smells of yesterday's incense ground, resins from frankincense and myrrh still clinging faintly to the walls. Your feet touch cool, smooth stone. Your servants, if you are of a household wealthy enough, have already brought water from the river stored in ceramic vessels overnight. It's not running water, of course, but it's fresh, filtered through woven reeds, and left to settle, so that sediment sinks and clarity returns. You begin by rubbing your hands with natron, a naturally occurring compound of sodium carbonate, used widely as both soap and deodorant. Its grainy texture feels like fine salt, but it doesn't foam. It scrapes, polishes, and dries. The smell is faint, but you know what it means. Clean skin is sacred skin. And in this climate, blistering sun by day, chilly breeze by night, it's also skin that survives. This isn't just about freshness. This is protection. The desert sun is merciless, and the body must adapt. You massage oils into your arms and legs, thick and golden, pressed from castor moringa or sesame. The oil traps moisture, yes, but it also creates a thin barrier against the sun's burn and the dust's abrasion. Some women mix crushed lotus petals or dried herbs into their oil, creating a kind of natural perfume. Others, more daring, add powdered galena. Yes, a lead compound to darken their limbs and repel insects. The application takes time. Hygiene here isn't rushed. It's an act of preparation, practical, aesthetic, and religious. To present yourself clean is to honor Ma'at, the goddess of balance, order, and truth. And your face especially must reflect that harmony. So you sit before a polished bronze mirror, still dappled with yesterday's fingerprints, and begin to prepare. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptians were among the earliest civilizations to develop a systematic approach to personal hygiene and cosmetics. Archaeological findings reveal combs, tweezers, razors, and even early forms of deodorant and breath mints. Both men and women wore makeup, especially kohl eyeliner, which was believed not only to enhance beauty, but also to protect the eyes from the sun's glare and ward off evil spirits. Kohl was typically made from a mixture of soot and galena lead sulfide, and was applied using small wooden or ivory sticks. Despite its toxic ingredients by modern standards, its antimicrobial properties may have reduced eye infections, a fact only recently confirmed through scientific analysis of ancient residue. You reach for the kohl stored in a delicate container carved from alabaster or shaped from blue fans. The powder is dark, silky, and fine like crushed charcoal. Using a stylus, you draw lines around your eyes, thick at the top, sweeping slightly downward at the outer corners. Not a cat eye, as modern fashion would later call it, but something more elemental, symbolic, protective. The eye of Horus rendered not in paint, but in ritual. And yes, it stings. Just a little. The galena bites for a moment before settling into the skin. But to go without it, that would feel exposed, vulnerable, naked in a way that no lack of clothing could match. Your lips are tinted too, perhaps, with ochre or carmine. Your cheeks brushed with red earth or crushed beetle shells mixed into fat. It's not soft or subtle. Egyptian makeup isn't designed for delicacy. It's for heat, for immortality, for the gods' quirky detail. Ancient Egyptian women sometimes used crocodile dung, yes, actual dried feces, as a form of contraceptive. Mixed with honey and natron, it was inserted vaginally as a suppository to prevent pregnancy. As strange as it sounds today, the mixture may have created a slightly acidic environment, which some speculate had mild spermicidal properties, though there's no conclusive evidence it was truly effective. Still, it speaks volumes about the ingenuity and perhaps desperation of women seeking control over their bodies in an era when childbirth was dangerous and death during labor common. Your hair, if visible, is also tended carefully. You might have a shaved head or closely cropped style if your upper-class wigs are more manageable in the heat and more hygienic. Or if you're from a different region or social class, you might braid your natural hair, rub it with scented oil, and tuck it beneath a linen wrap. Lice is always a threat, so the oils serve double-duty beauty and barrier. You think about the wig waiting in its box, thick strands of human hair, sometimes goat hair woven with beeswax and set on a mesh base. It's styled carefully with curls or plaits, and perhaps decorated with gold wires, glass beads, or even lotus flowers. When you wear it, you'll feel taller, statelier, and heavier. So heavy. But that too is the price of presentation. Historians still debate the exact line between health practice and religious ritual in ancient Egypt. To what extent were these routines meant to ward off disease? And to what extent were they spiritual armor? Some scholars argue that the line didn't exist, that in Egypt health and holiness were inseparable. A clean body wasn't just a social norm, it was a sacred offering. Others contend that these practices were mostly practical, made mystical by hindsight. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in the silt of time. You dust your neck with crushed myrrh, then place a necklace of faint beads around your throat. The colors blue, green, red aren't just pretty. They're protective, symbolic. Every adornment means something. The amulet hanging just above your sternum is shaped like an ankh, the sign of life. You believe, as many do, that it helps keep the body in balance, especially when exposed to illness or envy. Finally, you dress, if dressing is even the right word. A simple sheath of linen bleached in the sun and scented with lotus. No zippers, no fasteners. Just a length of cloth wrapped and tied. The air moves through it freely. Your skin breathes. And still, you look composed. Regal, ready. You glance once more in the mirror. The reflection is soft, distorted by the age of the bronze. But you know what you see. A face prepared. Not just washed, but made holy. Not just covered, but revealed. The day begins. The corridor outside your chamber is still cool when you step into it, though the rising sun has already begun to bake the horizon. The temple bells in the distance are muffled by distance and dust, but they pulse through the morning like a heartbeat. Women from your household, sisters, cousins, attendants, move about with practiced ease, each carrying their own rhythm of routine. Hygiene here is not just personal. It is communal, embedded in daily life, passed on through generations, with the same reverence as stories of Osiris or the rituals of embalming. You make your way to the washing courtyard, a shaded enclosure near the back of the house. Here, the washwoman has already begun scrubbing clothes in the large ceramic troughs. The linen is beaten against stones, rinsed, then spread flat on the smooth, sunlit ground to bleach naturally. The air smells of wet earth and crushed herbs with hints of the river not far beyond. Laundry is a full-day task, often communal, and usually done by the lower ranks of the household or by women like yourself, only when necessity demands. The fabrics are scrubbed using clay or natron or even river sand, then wrung out and laid in tidy rows. Whites are prized but difficult to keep. Linen absorbs sweat and dust, and the dyes of colored garments fade fast in the sun. You've learned to spot the social hints buried in someone's laundry stiff robes, with sharp pleats, carefully preserved whites, embroidered hems, all signs of wealth and status, not just cleanliness. Meanwhile, the younger girls braid each other's hair under the eaves, passing around oil jars and gossip with equal care. Their fingers move through strands with a deftness born of ritual. "She used too much castor?" Again, one girl whispers, nodding toward a neighbor's stiff bun. "It'll never hold in this heat." And you smile, because beauty here is a language everyone speaks, even the poorest of the poor. The poorest woman in the market might still wear a necklace of fence, might still rim her eyes with soot, because to neglect appearance is to invite misfortune. The body must be kept in balance, not only for health, but for favor with the gods. Your own balance will soon be tested. It's time to visit the shrine. You walk the length of the colonnade, bare feet slapping softly against limestone. The path is lined with tall vessels sealed against insects and dust. Some hold drinking water. Others contain mixtures used for healing and purification: aloe sap, fermented fig juice, crushed lotus root. There are jars of honey, too prized for its antiseptic properties, used in everything from wound care to mouthwash. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptians are credited with some of the earliest written medical texts, like the Ebers Papyrus and Edwin Smith Papyrus, which detail hundreds of treatments for ailments, ranging from toothaches to burns. Personal hygiene and medical care were tightly linked, and many standard hygiene practices, like regular shaving of the head to prevent lice and the application of medicinal pastes, stemmed from this dual focus on aesthetics and prevention. For women, menstrual hygiene was also addressed, though rarely in detail. Scholars believe they used softened papyrus or rolled linen tampons, sometimes soaked in honey, or herbal tinctures for cleansing. You pass one of the older women sitting quietly by the pool, her eyes lined heavily with kohl, her fingers glistening with oil. She doesn't speak, just nods. A sign of respect, or perhaps blessing. Her presence reminds you that the line between beauty and medicine, between ritual and routine, is more porous here than anywhere else. When you reach the shrine, you kneel and cleanse your hands with water perfumed with frankincense. You breathe it in, not because you are dirty in a modern sense, but because approaching the divine requires order and cleanliness is the first step. The offering table holds dried dates, a small cone of incense, and a folded scrap of cloth wrapped around a stone, perhaps symbolic or personal. You don't ask. Instead, you light the incense, say your prayers to Hathor, goddess of beauty and joy, and press your forehead to the ground. Later, you'll eat with your household, and hygiene will come again. Food must be prepared carefully. Raw meats are roasted quickly to avoid spoilage, and fish is often dried or salted. Bread is made fresh each day, though bits of sand often remain in the dough. You'll chew carefully slowly to avoid cracking a tooth. There's no dentist, not as you know it. A cracked molar may be treated with honey or poultices, but infection is a real danger. Quirky detail. In tombs, archaeologists have discovered tiny models of toilets complete with miniature cleaning tools offered as grave goods for the afterlife. These weren't functional, of course, but symbolic. They speak to the Egyptian belief that even in the next world, bodily needs and the rituals of cleanliness would continue. Some scholars have debated whether these toilet models suggest the existence of primitive lavatories in wealthier homes, though no direct plumbing system like that of ancient Rome has been confirmed. Before the evening sets in, you'll oil your body once more, this time with lotus essence, your favorite. It's thicker with a deeper scent, and when you walk through the house, the air will carry it long after you pass. There's no toothbrush here, but you chew the end of a miswak twig, a frayed root used to scrub the teeth and gums. It leaves a clean herbal taste in your mouth. You rinse with water steeped in mint, and then rub a bit of ground salt on your gums. It stings slightly, but it's familiar. Pain, like cleanliness, is sometimes part of ritual. Historians still argue whether these cosmetic and hygienic practices were adopted by all classes equally or primarily by the elite. While tomb art and burial items suggest a widespread ideal of bodily care, the physical labor and resource limitations of peasant women likely limited their access to oils, perfumes, or elaborate cosmetics. Yet even in modest graves, traces of coal containers, faience beads, and linen strips suggest that the impulse to care for the body and to carry that care into the next life was deeply human, not merely aristocratic. At night, you lie once more on your linen mat. The scent of the day clings to your skin, oil resin smoke. Your eyes are still rimmed with kohl, and your mouth still tastes faintly of salt. You've washed, you've prayed, you've walked in beauty and balance. You don't feel dirty. You feel prepared, as if every gesture of cleansing was also a whisper to the gods, I am ready. I am ordered. I am in tune with the world. Above you, the stars begin their slow dance across the desert sky. They shimmer like beads against linen. You close your eyes. The day ends. The light is soft again now. Perhaps in your mind, it's a pale morning spilling through worn linen curtains. Or maybe it's the dim warmth of a fire, almost burned to ash. Wherever you are, and however long you've been traveling, you begin to realize this across every dusty threshold, every freezing basin, every chamber pot or powder jar or fumigated gown. Women have found a way to preserve something invisible, something deeply human. Even without comfort, without privacy, without so much as a toothbrush, They carried on heads, high hands, raw eyes open. You've stepped through Victorian London's damp morning routines and sulfurous back alleys. You've tiptoed through Edo period Japan, where teeth were dyed black and taboos shaped hygiene as much as water or soap. You've bathed with fermented rice water in Qing China and sniffed at perfume-drenched wigs in revolutionary France. You've ducked under lavender sachets in medieval Europe, scraped off oil in Roman bathhouses, and rubbed honey salt paste into your teeth under Egypt's sun. And still, with all the grime, the cold, the awkward customs, the raw skin, and lead-laced powders, one thing stands out. Women weren't just surviving these routines. They were maintaining something bigger than hygiene, something more than just being clean. They were holding on to control. Because when your body is subject to the rules of a society that gives you little power, no vote, no income, no real escape, your body becomes the one thing you can still claim. And how you treat it, how you present it, even how you conceal it, becomes part of your dignity, even when there's no warm water, no real soap, no sanitary pads, no safety razors, no showers, or shampoo. Still, they adapted. They found ways to keep some kind of boundary between their inner selves and the chaos of the world around them. A folded rag, a pinched braid, a dab of lavender behind the ear. Each one a quiet decision, a small, defiant kind of self-respect. Mainstream historical fact. Throughout history, hygiene practices among women often diverge significantly by class, geography, and religion. But what's striking is how consistently personal care served not just biological function, but also moral, social, and emotional needs. Even under oppressive conditions, Victorian servants bathing once a month enslaved women in colonial territories, washing in secret under threat of punishment, or wartime mothers improvising hygiene with rationed goods. Rituals of care persisted. Medical historians agree that the concept of cleanliness was as much a tool of social discipline as it was a health guideline. And yet, despite the societal pressure, the scarcity of resources, and the near impossibility of comfort, the resilience of women shows up everywhere. In letters, diaries, and archaeological finds, we catch glimpses of the small victories, the soldier's wife who boiled rags in lavender water just to feel presentable, the midwife who saved scraps of linen to pass on to younger girls, the peasant girl who tucked rosemary into her braids before a festival. Quirky detail. In 18th century rural Wales, some women would wrap their hair in slices of potato overnight, believing it helped keep the scalp clean and the hair strong. Strange as it sounds, this was rooted in local folklore that associated earth-grown crops with purification. It might not have worked in any clinical sense, but for these women, it wasn't about science. It was about doing something, anything, to feel a bit more whole in a world that rarely offered wholeness. You shift now perhaps in your bed or just in your mind, and you think this was never really about dirt. Not fully. It was about how people lived inside their limitations. How women especially adapted to the absurd, the unfair, and the unsanitary, with creativity, humor, and more grace than history usually gives them credit for. Historians still argue whether modern hygiene ideals liberated women or simply placed new, more exhausting burdens on them. Is the pressure to look put together every day, with hair washed and skin glowing really all that different from being expected to powder your wig or lace your corset? Has society truly evolved in how it views female cleanliness, or just repackaged it in products and marketing? But what's clear is that across time and space, women have resisted being defined solely by the grime around them. They've made do. They've innovated. And often, they've quietly rebelled with a comb, a cloth, a cracked bit of soap. So tonight, as you lie warm and washed in your modern bed, your skin soft from clean water, and scented lotion, your head nestled into a fresh pillowcase, perhaps you'll carry just a flicker of what they carried, not pity, not horror, but admiration. quiet, steady admiration. Because for every woman who once folded a menstrual rag behind a cupboard, or scraped a lead comb through her hair, or whispered a prayer while washing with river water, there is a thread connecting them to you. That thread is survival. That thread is dignity. And it has always been enough to carry them through the darkest, dirtiest, most impossible days. Your breathing slows now. Not because the air is cleaner, though it is, but because you've taken this journey and you've made it home. The past isn't always pleasant. It isn't always picturesque. But it is without fail full of people doing the best they can with what they have. And tonight, you've walked among them. You've stood with women over cracked basins. You've heard the rustle of skirts as they stepped into cold mornings, the soft scrape of cloth against skin, the muffled clang of water pails in alleys. You've smelled the perfumes meant to mask the truth and felt the strain of bodies pulled between modesty and necessity. And still, through it all, you found dignity blooming like a rose through ash. Your world is different. Easier, perhaps. Or maybe just different in its demands. But what remains is the same core truth. Cleanliness is never just about soap and water. It's about agency. It's about who gets to choose how they care for themselves and what they're given to do it with. So as you drift toward sleep, know this: your comfort tonight is not an accident. It is the product of centuries of effort, invention, failure, and stubborn hope. The water in your tap, the sheets on your bed, the cotton of your pajamas, they are the result of a million choices made by a million hands long before yours. And though they may never know your name, the women who came before you would understand this peace, this stillness. They might even smile just a little, knowing that all their small dignities weren't lost to time. End of script. Sweet dreams.